The Middle Ages by Dorothy Mills, Chapter 3. The Byzantine Empire. Number 1. The Empire. In 330, Constantine founded a new city on the site of the old Greek colony of Byzantium. At that time, the Balkan Peninsula was covered with flourishing and wealthy cities, and Asia Minor was one of the most fertile and populous districts in the world. Constantinople stands in Europe, but it looks upon Asia. It has a deep and spacious harbor, and is practically impregnable against foes, whether they came by land or sea. After the fall of Rome, the Western Empire broke up, but the Eastern Empire, with Constantinople as its capital, lasted for almost 1,000 years longer. It only disappeared when the Turks captured Constantinople in 1453. This Eastern or Byzantine Empire had a long and varied history. In the 6th century, it had in Justinian, 527 to 565, a ruler of great administrative ability. Unlike many of the Eastern emperors, he worked incessantly and tirelessly, and under him the empire prospered. Practical reminders of his rule, in the form of aqueducts, bridges, monasteries, and churches, were left in many other cities as well as in Constantinople. But the most important and most far-reaching part of his work was the great codification of law that he made. In the code itself were collected all the Roman laws from the great imperial constitutions. In the digest, or Pandex, which were found the decision of ancient lawyers, decisions which were important because they created precedents, and in the institutes was found a commentary on Roman law written especially for the use of students. Justinian was ably helped by his empress Theodora. She had been a dancer, and the emperor had shocked his court by marrying her instead of some great princess. She was beautiful, ambitious, proud, pleasure-loving, and sometimes cruel, but she was also kind-hearted and gave active support to numerous charitable institutions of the empire. Theodora was possessed of great courage and ably supported Justinian at several times of crisis. In 532, there was a revolution in Constantinople. It bade fair to succeed. Parts of the city were in flames. The rebels had chosen a new emperor, and his advisors were begging Justinian to flee. Theodora alone held out. It has been said, she declared, that the voice of a woman should not be heard among the councils of men, but those whose interests are concerned have a right to speak. Death is inevitable and will come to us all, but no one is compelled to submit to the shame of surviving dignity and honor and leaving the empire for exile. If you wish to lengthen your life, O emperor, flight is easy. You have ships and there is the sea. But think well whether after you've escaped safely into exile, you will not wish every day that you were dead. Theodora's counsel prevailed. Justinian put down the rebellion, and for as long as he lived, his authority was unquestioned. The successful Eastern emperor was treated as ruler by divine right. He was absolutely supreme, and all power was centralized in him. But the weak and unsuccessful emperor was in danger not only of seeing another usurp his place, but of assassination. The later emperors were often despotic and sometimes weak. There were many conflicts over succession. There were attacks from Turks, at first repulsed, but later the city was neither strong enough nor well governed enough to hold out against them. The empire was hardly ever free from fear of invasion. It was beset with dangers from within and without. Yet, weak and misruled as it often was, it held out for 1,000 years. Here's a picture of Justinian, Theodora, and the Byzantine court costumes. Part 2, Byzantine civilization. The center of the Eastern Europe Empire was Constantinople, and within its walls were to be found the wealth of the world. It was brought there by merchants and caravans, and by ships from all the seas known to the people of the Eastern Mediterranean. Traders came from Persia and India and even China, from Samarkand and Bokhara, and from Abyssinia and the Red Sea. They came too from the west by way of the Adriatic and from Hungary and Central Europe. Russians and Hungarians, Italians, Spaniards, Persians and Egyptians, Armenians, Turks, Christians, Mohammedans, all jostled each other in the streets and marketplaces. Trade in Constantinople was strictly regulated. It was in the hands of the various guilds, and these were controlled by the state. No foreign merchant was allowed to carry on business until he had first reported himself to the state authorities, and only by special arrangements could he stay for more than 3 months. One of the most carefully and jealously supervised industries was that of silk weaving. Before the 6th century, the raw silk was imported from China, but the tale is told that shortly before the end of the century, some silkworm eggs were smuggled across the Chinese border and brought to Constantinople. A flourishing silk industry soon sprung up and the silk became so common that in the 12th century a traveler to Constantinople remarked that everyone in the city went about clothed like a prince. The prosperity of the Eastern Empire depended almost entirely upon its commerce, and in spite of wars and revolutions, weak emperors, and despotic governments, as long as Constantinople retained her supremacy as the great trading mart of the Mediterranean world, the prosperity of the empire was not seriously threatened. No Roman really liked the sea, and the Eastern Empire inherited that tradition. The Romans preferred to invest his money in land enterprises. He regarded the sea as a dangerous investment, for ships were in danger from storm and fire, from pirates and robbers of all kinds. Under the Roman maritime law, if a vessel on which money had been lent was lost at sea, the money could not be recovered. As long, however, as no rival sea power arose, those conditions did not seriously affect Constantinople. But when, at the head of the Adriatic, there arose a city which derived its wealth from the sea, the power of Constantinople began to decline. The rivalry between Constantinople and Venice became a struggle between a land power and a sea power, and the victory lay with the sea. Constantinople was called the Queen of Cities, and in the centuries from the 6th to the 11th, so often called the Dark Ages in Europe, the 500s through the 1000s, it presented a brilliant appearance. There were magnificent buildings, churches, palaces, the hippodrome where the circuses and chariot races took place, public baths built on Roman plan, and triumphal arches. In the Middle Ages, Constantinople was the only city that was lit at night, and more provision was made there for the poor than in most Western lands. The people were partly fed by the government, many of them did no work, and none of them paid taxes. They frequented the great shows given in the hippodrome, where the rival factions of blues and greens fought for victory in the chariot races. The rivalry did not end, however, in the hippodrome. Blues and greens came to stand not only for favorite charioteers, but for rival political factions in the city. It was said of Constantinople that for God there was a grand church of Sancta Sophia, for the emperor the sacred palace, and for the people the hippodrome. Oh, here's a page of pictures. The hippodrome, the emperor in his box, the consul providing the games with beasts, and ruins from around the year 1600. Byzantine scholarship was not very original, but Byzantine art was alive and creative. The architecture owed a great deal to the Roman type of building, but the walls were generally thinner, the columns more slender, decorated with elaborately carved capitals, and the buildings were characterized by the development of the dome. The interior of the churches, built during this period, are rich in color, and in many of them the walls are covered with frescoes and mosaics. The Byzantine artist needed the cooperation of the architect, for his art needed the spaciousness and dignity that only the architect could give him. The greatest of all the Byzantine churches was the Sancta Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, built by Justinian in the 6th century. The center of the building is a great square surmounted by a dome and placed between two semicircular domed apses. Round these apses cluster chapels with smaller domes, and the gracefully curving lines sweeping up to the great central dome, giving to the whole building a sense of proportion and spaciousness. The richest kinds of materials were used in decorating the interior: gold and silver, ivory and rare marbles, and the walls were covered with glittering mosaics. "Who shall describe," wrote a chronicler, "the fields of marble gathered on the pavement and lofty walls of the church? Fresh green from Karstus, and many-colored Phrygian stone of rose and white, deep red and silver, porphyry powdered with bright spots, green of emerald from Sparta, and Iasian marble with waving veins of blood red on white, streaked red stone from Lydia, the crocus-colored marble from the hills of the Moors, Celtic stone like milk poured out on glittering black, the precious onyx with the gold shining through it, and fresh green from the land of Atrax." Sancta Sophia was the joy and pride of all who lived in Constantinople. "Words worthy of it are not to be found. After we have spoken of it, we cannot speak of anything else," said a contemporary writer, and another declared that God must surely forgive Justinian much, if only because he has built Sancta Sophia. Byzantine craftsmen were skilled in many of the decorative arts: carved ivories, enamel work, goldsmith, silversmith work, jewelry, and all kinds of woven materials shot with gold and silver thread. The impression given by this art is of brilliance and splendor and color, but the workmanship is of delicacy and finish, perfect in every detail, the work of patient, exquisite care. The learning of the Eastern Empire was not very original. It consisted largely of copying and imitating the great classical writings. For the first time, the manuscripts took the form of books instead of scrolls. There were some original studies made in science, and mysterious Greek fire used in naval warfare to burn the ships of the enemy came from the East. But if the scholars of the Eastern Empire lacked originality or new ideas, they rendered a great service, for by their patient collecting and copying, they preserved what might otherwise have perished. Constantine had made Christianity the religion of the empire, but the churches of the East and West had tended to develop differently. In the West, the Bishop of Rome became supreme over all other bishops. But in the East, the patriarchs of the great cities, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, were of equal authority. The patriarch was supported by the Eastern emperor, and as time went on, rivalry and controversies arose. They were constantly developing between the patriarch and the pope. The patriarch tended more and more to be under the domination of the emperor, whereas the pope was independent, and as the west of Europe became Christian, his power increased. For several centuries, the divisions between the East and the West grew more marked, until in the 8th century a controversy broke out that was so sharp it threatened the unity of the two churches. The quarrel came about over the use of pictures. There was at this time a great increase in the belief in magic and witchcraft. The churches were not full not only of pictures, but statues and images called icons of Christ and of the saints, and the superstitious were attributing all kinds of miraculous powers not only to the saint or the picture the image represented, but to the image itself. The result was that these pictures and images were regarded as wonder-working, and they were at times worshipped. The emperor was opposed to the use of these images on several grounds. The Greek monasteries were very strong at that time and threatened to be serious rivals to the imperial power over the church, and the monks were in favor of what had become known as revering images. Not all the races living in the empire were Christian, and the emperor ruled also large numbers of Jews and Mohammedans. Both these religions forbade the use of images, and both Jews and Mohammedans regarded Christians' use of them as materialistic. The emperor believed that these races would be assimilated more easily to the empire if the Christian use of images were done away with, and so for these reasons he supported the iconoclasts, as the image breakers were called. In 726 he issued an edict forbidding the worship of images and ordering all statues to be removed from the churches and the walls to be whitewashed. The emperor was supported by a great many people, including the great part of the army, but the monks, the clergy, and the peasantry opposed him. But the emperor only triumphed for a short time, for by the end of the century, revering images had been restored. This controversy added to the growing antagonism between the East and the West. Other differences began to develop over rites and ceremonies and some of the doctrines until 1054, the final rupture, and the Eastern Church separated definitely from the Western. The latter was the Catholic Church of Western Europe, owing allegiance to the Pope. Western in civilization and tradition, using Latin as its official language. The former was the Eastern or Orthodox Church, owing no allegiance to the Pope, dependent in many ways on the Eastern Emperor, and Greek in its civilization, tradition, and language. The Western Church became the great civilizing power of medieval Europe. Though it was separated from the Eastern Church, it owes the latter a great debt, for the Eastern Empire preserved Europe from attack by uncivilized invaders from Asia, thereby giving her time to develop a civilization on the foundation laid by Rome. So did the Eastern Church preserve Europe from a Muslim civilization that at times threatened to overwhelm her. Byzantine emperors and the Byzantine Empire, the controversies and antagonisms of the early Middle Ages, may seem very far away from the modern world. But the Eastern Empire played an important part in the development of Europe. It was a refuge from the barbarian invaders for the ancient civilization which was preserved and cherished there. It kept alive the Roman legal system. It preserved the learning and language of Greece in the Hellenistic age. Because it was the gateway between East and West, it kept invaders out who might have destroyed the civilization it had inherited. But it also made it possible for much that was of value in the East to pass into Europe. The Byzantine Empire came to an end in 1453, but many of the traditions survived. The Balkan states, in particular Bulgaria and Serbia, inherited much from it. Their courts were fashioned on the principles of the imperial court at Constantinople. Their architecture was influenced by Byzantine models so much a degree that those on the west and their early trade bound them closely on the east. Long before 1453, the young Russian state was dependent on Constantinople for economic life. In many ways, more akin to the East than to the West, Russia was drawn into relations with the Eastern Empire, and when Russia became Christian, it was from the Eastern Empire that her missionaries came. The result was that she became part of the Orthodox Church, accepting its doctrine, its ritual, its discipline, and its administration. As the emperor had regulated the affairs of the church in the empire, so did the Russian emperors in Russia. The organization of Peter the Great in the 17th century made the Tsar more like a medieval Byzantine emperor than like the rulers of the West. The modern Slavic world can trace much of its history back to the Byzantine Empire and down to the revolution of 1917. Russian history is more clearly understood if seen with the understanding of the ancient Byzantine tradition she had inherited.